I'm Sandra Kelly, and I'm reading from Jacqueline Brunais' book, On the Drop Side of Yonder. The chapter we're going to read now is about books and movies, Chapter 12. The summer I was 12 years old, I read Les Miserables, all 1,200 pages of it. It was a copy with my great-grandfather's signature, George F. Knapp, on the first page. I soon became completely engrossed in the story of Jean Valjean, a poor Frenchman who stole a loaf of bread to feed his sister's starving children and was imprisoned for it. My great-grandfather, who died in the 1920s, had been an orphan. He and his brother were said to have been reared by neighbors, and as a young man he became a blacksmith and owned his own shop at the rear of a stagecoach shop in the Irish Hills. My mother said he walked several miles on Sunday barefoot to church, and then he put his shoes on before going inside. I always wished I could have met him. The fact that he was a very intelligent man, although unschooled, and that he owned the novel that I read and enjoyed, is a part of my fascination with all things French. Ever since reading the old copy of Les Miserables, I have wanted not only to go to France, but to speak French, and even to be French. I read every novel I could find that takes place in France, and I even sang The Last Time I Saw Paris, and Frère Jacques, and the stirring French national anthem. I fantasized about living there, being a member of the French underground in World War II, visiting the Louvre and the Cathedral of Notre Dame and the French countryside. I worshipped de Gaulle at one time, took 2 years of French in college and further courses afterwards, though I never learned to speak it fluently. I've dug through my genealogical sources and have yet to come up with a French ancestor. I never made it to France either. It's too bad that some fantasies are ruined. As an adult, I found out that de Gaulle was a pompous, self-absorbed fool. By the way, I was furious when I heard that Les Miserables was made into a musical, but that didn't stop me from going to see it on the stage. I loved it. Before I learned to read, my mother told stories to my brother and me. As soon as I learned to read, I read every book I could get my hands on. And when I was in elementary school, I didn't have access to the thousands of books that my grandchildren have today. When I started school in primer, that's the word in Gregory for kindergarten, the 10 pupils in my grade were taught to read by looking at flashcards. 100 words printed on a cardboard one and flashed one at a time. I remember it because Mrs. McClear told my mother that I'd done very well by learning 95 of them by Christmas. I marvel at the hundreds of books available to children now. We had no library in Gregory. I loved the stories in the reading books or the primers. I read not only through the primer in my own grade before school started, but also soon I was reading the reading books of the other grades in the room. Kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grades were taught in the same room. The Gregory primary room consisted of a total of about 45 children. Once a month, Miss Jorgensen went to the county seat, Howell, to visit the Livingston Library school supervisor. There she returned books previously borrowed and got another supply, about 20 books. Mostly they were for the older children, and were read in school after studies were completed. The school rule was that if our schoolwork was finished, we could take a book from the library and read. The books were often not new, but occasionally I would spot a colorful one that caught my eye. As soon as I could read well, probably in the 2nd or 3rd grade, I began to wait eagerly for the monthly treasure trove of books. Every time my mother went shopping in Jackson or Ann Arbor, she bought a book for me, often a big little book. and that was the imprint. And I read over each one over and over again. Occasionally she would find a book that I cherished. Those were the ones that I not only read about the main character, I became the character and lived the character. I particularly recall a book my mother brought me in the winter when I had whooping cough. It was titled Pink Donkey Brown. It began with the school letting out for the summer for the little girl, the main character, and her brother. And they were looking forward to playing with their friends every day. But their parents announced that the family would be moving out west for the entire summer. They were unhappy about the move, but their mother assured them that they would have an exciting time living in a new place. Soon, to assuage their loneliness, their parents bought them a donkey. After much deliberation, the children decided to call him Pink Donkey Brown because of his coloration in the sunshine. He gradually became their friend as well as their transportation, and they had exciting adventures, and I lived every one with them. I must have read through that book 3 or 4 times. Since we lived across from the school, I could see out the window, and I could see the kids who came to play out in the snow. Ordinarily, I would have been dissatisfied having to stay inside for those 2 weeks, but that time I didn't mind a bit, because wasn't I having just as great an adventure roaming up and down mountain trails and in and around hidden springs, riding in the cart pulled by a sweet little donkey? The stories stayed with me for years. At school one day, as I was browsing among a new supply of books from the county seat, I happened upon Little House in the Big Woods by Laura Ingalls Wilder. The illustrations were pleasant, but I didn't like the title for some reason. I almost put it back on the shelf, but by that time I'd read the first page and I was already transported into another world. It was the world of our country when the bravest of people set out to conquer the wilderness. I became a member of the Ingalls family, a sister to Mary, Laura, and baby Carrie, and then later baby Grace when she was born. It was the most exciting book I'd ever read, and I also learned a lot about America in the late 1800s. Pa Ingalls was never quite satisfied staying in one place, so the family moved on, going by covered wagon to the woods in Wisconsin and later to the prairies in Kansas, all of which was still Indian territory. Eventually they moved to Missouri. Theirs was a loving family who had many adventures, all of which, or most, were true. I didn't have access to a true library until much later, when I finally read the rest of the Little House on the Prairie series. When I taught school, I read some of the Laura Ingalls Wilder books to my 3rd graders. When I had my own children, we always had the whole set around. Either I read aloud to the children or they read the books themselves, often, many times. I recall my daughter Francine rereading one of them when she was in high school. I can still suspend reality and live a book, and I am glad I can because books are my friends. I pity people who have to be doing something all the time and need to have people around constantly. To me, a cold winter day provides a perfect excuse for sitting down and making friends with a good book. My 3 favorite movies are Gone with the Wind, Dr. Zhivago, and Saving Private Ryan. I have seen the first at least 20 times, and the second about 10, and the third only once. Its impact was so profound that I probably will never see it a second time. A lesser-known movie that also affected me profoundly is the 1949 film Pinky. The story is about a light-skinned African-American girl who left the South for New York. She changed her name from Pinky to Patricia and passed as white. She became a registered nurse and got engaged to a medical student, and that character was played by Jean Crane. Her grandmother, played by Ethel Waters, who reared her, insisted that she come back home to take care of a terminally ill, previously wealthy, white woman who was played by Ethel Barrymore, and whom the grandmother had worked for all her life, and who had cared for the grandmother when she had been desperately ill. Pinky and Miss M lock horns immediately. The latter goads the former, suggesting that she has acted above herself in passing as a white person and thus becoming a nurse. Pinky retorts that she had worked hard and passed all her examinations and has no need to apologize for it. Moreover, she says she recalls how Miss M had chased her off the property when she was a small child, and that she would not be there taking care of her, except that her grandmother felt an obligation. When Miss M accuses Pinky of stealing a piece of jewelry, Pinky goes directly to a nook in the desk and says, "Here it is, in the exact place you told me to put it." The two are hostile to each other at times, but declare a truce, and they begin to let down their guard and find that they have a great deal in common. Pinky intervenes when greedy, distant relatives try to get Miss M to sign her elegant home over to them. Miss M stands up for Pinky when the local doctor treats her as an inferior. By the time Miss M dies, they have become very close. Miss M wills the mansion to Pinky when she dies, stating in the will that Pinky would know what to do with it. After pondering what Miss M means, Pinky decides to convert the mansion into a healthcare center for poor people. She telephones her fiancé, breaks the engagement, and says that she will not be returning to New York. I remember hoping the fiancé would also come to the South to help her, but I suppose that would not have been realistic then. The movie had a profound effect upon me. The acting was marvelous, and the director was Elia Kazan. Recall that this movie was produced before the civil rights movement began, and as for my own background, I was oblivious to racial discrimination. The only contact I had had with black persons was one family who had moved into a small house on a farmer's property. The man worked for the farmer, and his children attended the school. Little Ruby, a couple of grades below me in the schoolroom, was treated like a princess because of the novelty. I recall only one incident. A boy called her the N-word. Ruby shot back, "You're nothing but poor white trash." I recall telling my mother about the incident, and she laughed heartily, and she said, "Good for Ruby." Even when I was in high school, most students would not have been found dead studying Latin. However, I thought there was something mysterious and deliciously irrelevant to be able to say I was learning a dead language. Being the only kid in the Gregory 10th grade, I had to take what was available. Latin wasn't part of my curriculum. A local woman and former teacher, Miss Howlett, offered to teach it to me. My own teacher, who taught the usual subjects, also had to teach all the classes of the 8th and 9th graders in the same classroom. Going to Mrs. Howlett's home in the evening, I learned the conjugations of Latin verbs: amo, amas, amat, amamus, amatus, amant, the verbs of love, for example, and the declensions of nouns, feminine, masculine, and neuter, with their various endings, which I will not begin to try to relate to you, but many of which I remember to this day. By the end of the year, I had a good foundation for what was to come. Ann Arbor High School, which I attended in my junior and senior years, was huge, or at least it seemed so to me. I had come out of a one-horse town where all 10 grades were herded into 3 rooms. Among the courses I signed up for were second-year Latin, which consisted of the life, times, and writings of Julius Caesar. I still recall the names of some of the tribes that Caesar conquered as he rampaged across Europe and into Great Britain. Miss Lavance Rieger, the gentle-voiced teacher, knew her subject well and made it interesting. Occasionally she would insist that we memorize certain passages which she considered immortal, one of them being Veni, Vidi, Vici, a proclamation of Caesar's. It meant, of course, I came, I saw, I conquered.